Vegas's hyper aggressive strategy once again proves they can attract whatever player they want. But will adding Mitch Marner get them back to the promised land? This is the 2025-26 deep dive on the Vegas Golden Knights. Hello and welcome back to my NHL deep dive series. This is team number 3. We are pretty close to the end now. We just got 2 teams left. Today we're talking about Vegas, and obviously, like, the biggest move for Vegas this offseason was getting Mitch Marner. And yes, they lost Nick Roy, who is a, legitimate, good bottom 6 forward. Likely would have slotted into the, 3 or 4th line center spot in Vegas, depending on how they want to use Thomas Hertl. But still a solid player that they lose there, and I talked about him in the Leafs video. They also lose Alex Pietrangelo, who is out, it sounds like, forever. Based on the story, on the stories that are coming out at the moment. And so yes, like, they do add Mitch Marner, but losing, Pietrangelo especially is going to hurt their blue line, which we'll talk about in a second. They are also a team that is in on Rasmus Andersson. It sounds like they're the only team seriously on Rasmus Andersson. So that is something that could also happen at some point, but as of right now, we're going under the assumption that the team that they have currently, as the time I'm recording this video, is the team that they will be going into the season with. And Vegas is such a fascinating team because they will always be like the most hyper-aggressive team in the league to acquire as many star players as they can, right? Like, if you look at this team where it was, 7 years ago, and where it is now, it is a vastly different roster, right? This was a team that made the Stanley Cup final their first year and then decided they had to go out and get Mark Stone, and then they had to go out and get Max Pacioretty, and then they had to go get Thomas Tatar. Then they signed, Pietrangelo. They go get Noah Hanifin. They go get Paul Stastny, who was at one point, a pretty big free agent. They get Robin Lehner. They go get, Aiden Hill. And they just continuously... the Jack Eichel you can add to that list. Obviously Mitch Marner now, and this team is so unique because they've just kind of like they just kind of don't care about like developing players. To be frank with you, right? Like, look at this Vegas Golden Knights team. How many of their players did they draft? Right? Like, one? Like, I genuinely don't know the answer to that. 1, 2? Like, it's a very small number of players, especially impact players on this team, that they've actually drafted and developed. And it's so unique because it worked. They won a Stanley Cup, and they're going to be, continuously in the hunt as the top team in the NHL year over year. And it's such a almost like a breath of fresh air is the best way to put it for the NHL, because we don't see teams being built like this, right? We see, it's very much we have to draft and develop. And that's all you hear about. And Vegas kind of just took it a different way. They're like, no, we're actually just going to take advantage of the fact that 90% of the time, how a prospect is perceived on draft day isn't how they're going to end up, right? Sometimes that's, sometimes they end up for the better, but for the most part, right? If you go into every single draft, most of the guys taken in the first round, the scouting report is on them is, oh, this guy's going to be a good top 6 forward, or this guy can be a top 4 defenseman. It's like, go look at any draft from the last decade plus, any draft ever, and look at how many players actually turned out to be good top 6 forwards or good top 4 defensemen. The number is quite small, right? Like, the reality is there isn't very many of those spots available, and those players don't grow on trees. So Vegas has understood that, and they've attacked that in a way that's so unique from the rest of the NHL. And I really think that is what's led them to be this team that can be like, instead of hoping that our young draft prospect is going to turn into something, we're just going to go get a guy that we know is that, right? In the case of Jack Eichel, and look at the Jack Eichel trade for Vegas now, right? Like, it's a runaway home run, right? Like, Alex Tuch is good, but like, how's Peyton Krebs been doing, right? Like, he was the big piece in that deal, and we haven't seen much of him. So the point is this, that Vegas's strategy for team building is so unique, and I'm so enamored by how they continued to do this. And again, this was a situation where it's like the team was pressed up against the cap. There's no way they're going to be able to fit, Mitch Marner under this salary cap, and then all of a sudden they hand out Mitch Marner his massive contract, and here we are. And now they have the replacement for Mark Stone when Mark Stone retires, or gets shipped off to the Shadow Realm or whatever they end up doing with him. And it's just it's so unique and it's so intriguing to watch. And I mean, like, hell, we have a bunch of free agent names still available, right? Like Artemi Panarin's available this summer. Connor McDavid's available this summer. Like, I'm not saying that they're going to end up in Vegas, but like, you can't tell me that Vegas is going to be circling the wagons trying to figure out a way to offer Connor McDavid a 7-year contract, right? Like, they're going to give it a shot. Now, I don't think Connor McDavid's going to go to Vegas, but I'm just saying that, like, this is a team that's in on every single player, and they're in no way happy or satisfied with the way this team looks. I mean, Jack Eichel's a free agent this summer, so replacing him with Connor McDavid sounds like a pretty big upgrade. Sounds like a pretty good upgrade to me. The point I'm trying to make here is that this team is never finished. They're never complete, more so than like any other team in the league. And this could be a very different Vegas Golden Knights roster by the end of this season than it is today. And obviously it's a lot different than it was at the beginning of this series, but last year. So that's kind of where we're at right now. But, you look at the splits here for Vegas, and it looks pretty good. Fourth in offense, fifth in defense, 20th in goaltending. But again, like I've been saying, those teams kind of in the low teens to, high 20s are all fairly close together. You could kind of order them however you want, and it's not going to bother me. It's just, a matter of preference at that point. There's really, I'm not firm on any team from like 15th or 14th to like 25th on my goaltending list because it is so volatile. 11th on special teams, but I do absolutely think it's going to get better. And second in coaching culture, because I'm sorry, Vegas is just it's their front office is masterminds in terms of maximizing the value of their assets. And we jump into that coaching culture, and Kelly McCrimmon, I think is easily in that group as one of the best GMs in the league, and I kind of include George McPhee in that category there, where I think that both of them together have done a phenomenal job just maximizing their assets as much as possible, and it really is just an absolute masterclass from them in terms of asset management and just always being in on these big players, right? Like if you think about it, like Alex Pietrangelo was the biggest free agent the year that he was a free agent. Jack Eichel was one of the biggest available trade pieces in the league. Mitch Marner was the biggest forward free agent since Panarin, probably. They're all in Vegas now. And it's just like they're always in on everybody, and they've set themselves up so well to be able to be in on everybody. And they're very ruthless in how they do it. But they've done it in such an effective manner that this is kind of the world that we live in now. Bruce Cassidy, I have at B+. I haven't been like super satisfied with what Bruce Cassidy's done here. I thought he'd be a great hire for this team, but even then, I mean, like Vegas's ability to just rifle through coaches is astronomical. They've just like look at for as much success as Vegas has had, they've had a lot of head coaches. it's kind of astonishing actually. If you look at just their team record, right, over the last whatever it has been 8 years, 7-8 years, they rifle, like they've had this is their third, fourth head coach. Like it's pretty crazy. And so it's like they treat their staff in the same way that they treat their players, where everybody's just expendable as soon as you outlive your value. In terms of their season outlook, their vibes, they're a contender. I had to do vibes for Vegas because they're a vibey team. I don't know what to tell you. But, they're obviously in the contender category. I don't think anybody's really going to argue with that. Barring injuries, their forward core is one of the best in the league. Their blue line's still solid. Goaltending, it is what it is, but Aiden Hill's won a Stanley Cup, so I'm not super, bent out of shape there. It really is just a really, really solid team, and pair that with the fact they're in the weakest division in the NHL, and it seems like a recipe for them to be dominant. I mean, like, hell, imagine if Connor McDavid does end up leaving the Oilers this year and going to a non-Pacific Division team. This is Vegas' division to run for quite a while, if that's the case. And it really does come down to just how good their management team is. Like when we look at their team here, their team is getting older, but that doesn't really bother me because Vegas has shown this ability to just be able to take advantage of that and turn assets into other players, right? And it's like Mark Stone is getting older, right? Like last year, the argument was, well, their window might be closing because Mark Stone's getting older. And now it's like, well, they just replaced him with Mitch Marner as their number one winger. So it really is a team that just is able to take advantage of all these opportunities, and they've done a fantastic job. So I have no real worry in that. Like, until I see this team completely fall off and the wheels fall off, I'm not going to believe that's going to happen. Look at their numbers from last year, and it was a pretty solid season. Third overall in the league, first obviously in the Pacific Division. Ninth in goals for, ninth in goals against, sixth in total goal share, fifth in expected goals for, 11th in expected goals against, eighth in expected goal share. Evolving Hockey has them about the same level, more or less, in terms of their expected numbers. Second in power play, 26th in penalty kill. Their power play, I think, can only get better with Mitch Marner on it. Their penalty kill might get better. In terms of it, Marner's played on the penalty kill. His penalty kill numbers aren't, they're not world beating, but they're solid enough. That's definitely a concern. Nick Lavoie spent a bit of time on their penalty kill. Alex Pietrangelo, obviously. So the penalty kill is always going to be kind of a concern, but their expected numbers on the penalty kill were actually pretty decent. They're above league average, so you think that there might be some positive regression there anyway, in terms of what they can do on the penalty kill. So I'm not super concerned about that from an overall perspective. We look at the offense, man, and I mean, it starts with Marner and Eichel, right? Like, these are two of the best players at their position in the NHL. They've been acquired in ways that teams don't usually acquire these types of players, trade, and then free agency. Obviously, Mark Stone is still a very, very good player, although not as good as he used to be, but still a very good two-way forward there, and still adds a lot of defensive presence there. William Karlsson is super underrated as a defensive center as well, and still brings some offense to the table as well. Thomas Hertl might be the best third-line center in the NHL if that's how he's played. But then they have guys like Riley Smith, who decided to come back after leaving for after getting moved out and moving on to greener pastures. He bounced around for a little bit, and he's back in Vegas now. Took a discount to come here and play. Pavel Dorofeyev was had a really strong season last year as a goal scorer, and I think that will only continue. Ivan Barbashev, not the biggest fan of Ivan Barbashev, but somebody who adds that power forward ness to this offense here. Brett Howden was actually had a pretty solid playoff despite being just kind of okay. Brandon Saad I really like. I think that was just a absolutely fantastic pickup by them last offseason. Colton Sissons they picked up this year to kind of be the replacement for Nick Waugh, which I think, based on the role that he's going to be given, is a pretty good replacement. Then Alex Holtz, who's still kind of a question mark. I think that my faith in Alexander Holtz turning out to be some great player is gone, but I do think that he can still be a decent bottom six forward. So we'll see what they can get out of him there. But yeah, I mean, overall, like this forward core is really strong, right? It's good defensively in a lot of areas. It's very deep down the middle, and it has the star power up front. This forward core should have no problem exceeding the offensive production they had last year. The only loss on it really being Nick Waugh. And you replace that with Mitch Marner, who can be easily a 100-point player on this team, especially playing with Eichel. And I think that the whole team is going to have boosts in productivity because of the fact that teams are going to have to key in more on Eichel and Marner than they had to last year. We begin with Mitch Marner here, and I mean, there's not a whole lot to say about one of the best wingers in the NHL, and I know there's a lot of people out there that dislike Mitch Marner because his playoff numbers in Toronto didn't look great and all this, but who else's playoff numbers didn't look great in Toronto and then went somewhere else and immediately found success? Phil Kessel, right? Like it's the same. It's essentially the same player and fit, except for the fact that Marner is younger and a much better player than what Phil Kessel was when he left Toronto. And you're really looking at this and you're saying, well, the pressure of the market isn't there, right? Like in terms of comparisons of hockey market in Vegas compared to Toronto, it's not even close, right? Like Vegas is like there's nothing going on there, right? People just like the team and the team's going to be good, so they don't really care. And I really think that not only can we see a stronger potential regular season out of Mitch Marner, but I do think that the playoff success is just going to kind of happen for him. There's going to be a lot less pressure on him to perform in the playoffs. There won't be as much lights on him. I also think that one of the underrated things here about the move to Vegas that people aren't really talking about is not just the media pressure itself, but the fact that he's in the West Coast, right? Like, and this is just, it's the West Coast bias that people talk about all the time, where Western Conference teams, especially in the Pacific, don't get the same kind of media attention. And Vegas is an anomaly in that because it's Vegas. But you look at the attention that even Vegas got. I mean, look at Jack Eichel last season, where he was putting on an impressive MVP season, and nobody really cared all that much. I really think that just the fact that he's now playing in the West Coast, where there will be less eyes on him per game, because games are going to start at 10 p.m. Eastern time, and people are going to stay up to watch Vegas play. I really think that in itself could also get some pressure off of Mitch Marner, and same with even in the playoffs, right? Like the late game typically is the one that has the fewest viewers by the end of the game, because usually they're ending by like 1 a.m. Eastern, right? If you get overtime, it might be later than that. So I really think that is, will have a bit of an impact on his performance, right? I think it's just intangible things like that, like compared to the melting pot, the stove that was Toronto. I really think that we could see, the best out of Mitch Marner coming up. And the thing is, though, Vegas has proven that like they've won a Stanley Cup with arguably a worse offensive core. I definitely think it was a worse offensive core when they won the Cup. Like, the door is wide open here for Vegas, regardless of, like, if Mitch Marner puts up the same numbers that he did last year or the last couple years in Toronto, I think that, like, they'll be fine, because, like, Jack Eichel has proven he can already play in the playoffs. Mark Stone has proven he can play in the playoffs. William Karlsson has proven he can play in the playoffs, right? So you don't need Marner to be, like, the number one offensive driver on this team, even though I think by the end of the year he probably will be. And I really think that we could see a fantastic, coming out party here for Mitch Marner to kind of silence all the critics. And I mean, they're certainly in Stanley Cup contention, so maybe he follows the same path that Phil Kessel did and immediately wins as soon as he leaves Toronto. And that'd be, I know Leafs fans would be thinking that's incredibly poetic, and absolutely, it seems likely if you're a Leafs fan. Jack Eichel is kind of in the same boat here, where the offensive production last year was just, like I said, it was borderline MVP level. Like, I think he definitely didn't get enough talk in that category. He was just a absolute force to be reckoned with offensively, and both 5-on-5 and on the power play. The defensive numbers certainly aren't there for Jack Eichel, and they never really have been. He's never been, an elite two-way center. He's had flashes of being really good. Pre-injury in Buffalo, he was actually a pretty decent defender. But again, like, you have a Vegas team here where he's not going to be placed in those situations at all, right? Like, it's going to be, Colton Sissons and then, William Karlsson that are going to be their defensive centers. Jack Eichel is just going to be, offense. He's going to be able to put up, another 100-point season, I'd expect. And he's going to be, one of the better centers in the league. And hell, heading into a contract year, people talk about all the big names that are on the market right now. And nobody's really talking about Jack Eichel as being one of those big free agents that's available. And it's like, it's going to be a really intriguing season to see how Jack Eichel is going to be able to, maintain everything that's going on here. And it'll be interesting to see how he pairs with Mitch Marner, because Mitch Marner is certainly the most gifted player that he's had the opportunity to play with during his time in the NHL. And I'm really curious to see how that chemistry builds. They've already looked decent in the playoffs, or in the preseason rather. I'm fascinated to see how the offensive creativity for both these players is going to flourish as the season goes on. Mark Stone is the third guy on this team now, which is crazy because a couple years ago Mark Stone was the guy on this team. And again, I think that just speaks to how Vegas has been able to consistently build this team. You look at other contenders that were up there, and obviously Vegas won their Stanley Cup post Jack Eichel trade, but like a lot of teams would have just been like, all right, the Mark Stone era is ending. Now we're going to go through our typical tank here and we're going to, rebuild the roster and retool now that, Mark Stone's aging and William Karlsson's older and, he's our first line center right now. And, Theodore and Pietrangelo are a good tandem, but it's like, no, we have, now we have Noah Hanifin there to replace Alex Pietrangelo as our number 2 guy. We have, Jack Eichel to replace William Karlsson as our number 1 center. And now we have Mitch Marner to replace Mark Stone, and they're really transitioning kind of into this next era of Vegas Golden Knights almost seamlessly. And Mark Stone still adds a lot of value. He's still a very good defensive forward. He's still going to put up decent numbers on the penalty kill. I don't think that he's going to get the Selke love anymore. I think that ship has kind of sailed by, and it's really unfortunate that it did, because there was some years where Mark Stone was pretty clearly the best defensive forward in the NHL, but unfortunately he didn't play center, so nobody cared. And it's really unfortunate that he never was able to secure multiple Selkes, to be honest with you. But I think that ship's really sailed at this point. Maybe with the Alex Barkov injury, they can give him his legacy Selke, which is something that they seem to do with awards. You get the legacy Norrises, you get the legacy Selkes. I definitely think that he deserves it, and this could be the year where they do that, unless they want to give the legacy Selke to Anze Kopitar before he retires, but that's a whole other story. Maybe this is the year that Mark Stone gets it just as the legacy award, because he deserves one 100%. And I think that the Barkov injury could actually maybe feed into that a little bit. And the fact that he's just going to be playing more defensive starts now, right? Because, Mitch Marner's going to be taking those offensive ones. So there is some hope that he will get his legacy Selke. I highly doubt that we end the season. And I'm looking at Mark Stone as somebody that I would vote for the Selke, if given a vote. But at the same time, I think a legacy award for him would be very good. He's still obviously the leader on this team. He's been here through most of the quote unquote rebuild. He's here for the only time they missed the playoffs, right? So there's that too. But I really do think that he's still a very important player to this team, although his on ice results have clearly taken a step down, and he's had the injuries, and we can talk about how if the length of those injuries were necessarily as long as they were, but certainly he has had injuries and they have started to build up. And I mean, he's just an older player now too, so Mark Stone's overall impact is certainly going to take a step back this year, but they were able to replace that with Mitch Marner, so I don't think the overall team results are going to see much of a difference, if any, or they would probably even get better. William Karlsson is such a fun player to me, because William Karlsson has had a really strange career trajectory, right? This is somebody who the Columbus Blue Jackets didn't really value, right? They decided to trade him and a pick to the to the Vegas Golden Knights to protect Josh Anderson, who is obviously no longer on the Columbus Blue Jackets. And then William Karlsson proceeds to have a 40-goal season. Everybody freaks out. All of a sudden, he's like the next big thing. And then Vegas goes out and acquires the Stastny, Pacioretty, and Stone line, which kind of demotes William Karlsson to the second line. And he's basically been there ever since. But William Karlsson is vastly underrated here. Now, his finishing ability has seen the most ebbs and flows for a player that I think I've ever seen, because he had a 40-goal season, then couldn't shoot, and then had another really strong season, then couldn't shoot again, and then last year or 2 years ago had a really, really strong season shooting, and then last year it really tanked again. And it's like his offensive production in terms of his play driving and his defensive ability have actually stayed fairly stable throughout his run in Vegas, but the finishing has just been so inconsistent. And now for a second line forward, that's not as big of a deal, right? He's not the number one center. He's not the primary, play driver like he was in year one with Vegas, or at least one of them, along with, Marchessault, James Neal, and Riley Smith, and whoever else you want to add into that. But it's still a player that I think could still bring a ton of value to this team, especially if you're, $5.9 million. He's on a really nice cheap deal for the next 2 years. And, if he decides to stay in Vegas, it'll probably go down, or at least be, the same. It will go down in terms of percentage of the cap, because, he'll be 33 years old, 34 years old. The contract just won't, the money just, won't be as high. So this is somebody that I think could easily just retire a Vegas Golden Knight, and go down as, one of the best Golden Knights, quote unquote, in history. So I like what he can bring across the board. I just need the finishing to to even out here, because as he gets older, naturally, the defensive ability is going to decrease because he just won't be able to keep up speed-wise. The offensive play driving is going to decrease because he won't be able to keep up speed-wise, and, his hands aren't going to be as fast, and just, all the things that happen to old players are going to happen. But if he can consistently keep his finishing at a similar level, that shouldn't decline as drastically. And I think that should be the kind of the goal here for Vegas, is just make him into a guy who can score at a decent clip on a second line, play those defensive minutes, and just kind of be a very, very good secondary scorer for this team. And just get that consistency up, because, the pattern that he's been going on says that this year should be a good finishing year for him anyway. But I do think that getting consistency out of William Karlsson in that sense is a key factor here for this team to have a ton of success, because they have, some other guys beyond him here that could also use some consistency. But William Karlsson is somebody that, obviously Vegas fans love, and I love. I think his story has been crazy. He's a super fun player, and I think, as a second line center here, he's one of the best in the league still. The other guy that I was talking about is Thomas Hertl, right? And Thomas Hertl's actually put up some pretty good underlying numbers in terms of his, his micros and his production in that sense. It just hasn't led to be the, dominant player that I think a lot of people expected him to be when he came to Vegas. Contract isn't great, and it's not going to age particularly well. But as the cap keeps going up, it'll be less of an issue. But for now, it's definitely not a good contract on this team. But I do think there's still a ton of value in what Thomas Hertl is for this team, right? Like, especially if he can be that third line center, or even, a winger in the top six and get moved around, and maybe they acquire, a third line center for cheap. I think there is a lot of value in what Thomas Hertl can be, as a secondary guy. As we've broken this down here, going through this team, he is the fifth player that I've talked about in their forward core, right? Typically, if you've been following along this series the whole time, I do it relatively in order from most to least important of the people I want to talk about. So Thomas Hertl's fifth, right? Like, I think people, if you were to rank the Vegas Golden Knights forwards, it would probably go pretty similar to the order I've had. Maybe you want to put Eichel ahead of Marner. That's fine. But, like, he is the fifth guy on this forward core. Like, I can't stress that enough. This is somebody who was a, all-star number one, forward on a team. Now, the Sharks teams that he was on weren't particularly good, but he was still a number one forward there, right? Like, Timo Meier was on those teams too. Timo Meier was really good too. The fact that Thomas Hertl, we were talking about him as the fifth most important forward on this team, and you could probably argue, Dorofeyev might be ahead of him. You could argue Barbashev might be ahead of him. If you really want to get into that, we can, but, like, that's not the point. The point is this. Any sort of success that Thomas Hertl has is, like, added on bonus to this team, right? If his role is just to come in and be, a 50-point, 55-point third line center, like, holy shit, that's great, right? If he can bounce back just with the, massive quality of competition, downgrade that he's going to have, and turn into, like, somebody who can put up, 65 points, 70 points maybe, like, man, like, the potential return that they could get here and the potential pop that Thomas Hertl could get is crazy. Now, I don't expect that to happen. I think that it's likely that he'll be, in that lower end range of those numbers, and, be kind of their third line guy, and, be a matchup nightmare for teams. And I think that's good enough, right? Like, I think that he's overpaid for that role, but I don't think it really matters, right? Like, I don't think Vegas particularly cares all that much, right? They just, the salary cap is just a means for them to acquire the players they want to acquire. They don't really care about getting, value for their contracts. Let's put it that way, right? I think that based on the way they've built their team, that's kind of what it is. It's just, they're going to try to just accumulate talent in whatever means they can, and however they do that is just, it doesn't really matter. And in that sense, Thomas Hertl is going to be a big, he's almost like an X factor on this team, because I think if he can exceed expectations massively, Vegas might easily be the best team in the NHL, and especially with the injuries that Florida just had. I think that's possibly very likely. So Hertl's somebody I'm kind of watching here. I don't expect anything crazy from him, but again, like, he's their fifth most important forward. Like, go to any other team in the league, like even the teams that I have ahead of Vegas, is their fifth best forward, is their fifth most important forward have as much potential as Thomas Hertl did at some point or does now? Like, you'd be very hard pressed to find a number 5 that is this good. So I don't really like. Yes, Thomas Hertl's been a bit of a disappointment based on what the excitement level was when they acquired him, but I really don't think that there's a huge massive issue going on there. I think that there's still a ton of he brings a ton of value to the team just for what he can do on the ice. Pavel Dorofeyev had an incredible season last year, didn't he? Like, oh my God, at 24 years old, just the offensive pop that he had was fantastic. And I really believe that this is what I mean. Like, Vegas just finds players that they can just slot in here. People weren't really talking about Pavel Dorofeyev being this top 6 high end player that was just going to burst onto the scene and be a fantastic two-way forward. Somebody who's fantastic at generating offense, really good at suppressing chances. His power play numbers are phenomenal. I really don't think anybody expected that. And when it happened, it was really a massive surprise. And I mean, there was a lot of talk at the beginning of the season about like Dorofeyev being a very good like dark horse Calder pick. And now obviously it didn't pan out. But his path to success was actually pretty easy to project. And I think that it's just going to continue, right? Like, this is somebody who even with a if he slumps, like, we just went over it. Like, Vegas has so many guys they could just slot into that role, right? Like, Riley Smith could slide up into the top 6 easily and take that spot, right? Brandon Saad, I think, could even slot up into the top 6 if they needed him to. So if Dorofeyev continues to grow, which I'd expect him to, that's great. And if not, like, Vegas has contingencies in place, and if Dorofeyev just works out to be a really good third liner playing with Thomas Hertl, like, there's success there too. So he's somebody that, again, like, I think very similar to Thomas Hertl, is a massive X factor if he can continue to take steps forward. Vegas might have, if the 6 players that I just talked about can all be the best versions of themselves for what they are today, Vegas might have the best top 6 in the NHL by like a pretty significant margin if that happens. The last piece of the quote unquote top 6 here, the 7th player I've talked about here is Ivan Barbashev, which is insane, right? Like, Ivan Barbashev's a really pretty solid player. He's $5 million for 3 years. It's starting to look like a better contract, just the way that people are aging. I didn't love it at the time. His defensive numbers aren't very good. His offensive production is getting better, but it's not, it doesn't blow me away. But just as a power forward, he adds something different to this offense. I think it's something they really need, right? You go over the players that we talked about here, and for the most part, they're all similar in terms of like how they generate offense, right? It's very much a more flashy, quick play driving transition offensive game that just high skill, whereas Barbashev is a lot more of that like traditional power forward type, like get in the corners, win those battles, get to the net kind of player. And I do think that there is value in that in terms of what Vegas needs, which is why I think that he hasn't been moved yet, to be honest with you. Like, there's been a lot of his name has been brought up quite a bit in potential trades to clear cap space, because the $5 million cap hit isn't nothing. But it's why I do think that like somebody like potentially Thomas Hertl, if they can get around the no move clause, could be the guy they move out if they have to bring in another player, just because Thomas Hertl does a lot of the same things that some of the forwards ahead of him do, whereas Ivan Barbashev gives them that extra type of player. And I do think that there is value in that, right? Like, his finishing has been solid. It's been getting better year over year. His assist totals are actually really good. He's a pretty good playmaker, and I mean, he's playing with very high skilled players. I do think that if the line is him, Eichel, and Marner, which is what Puckpedia expects, it's also what Daily Faceoff has, I think that works out really well, because Barbashev will be, the power forward on that line. He can be kind of the grittier, like battling in the corner type player, because everybody knows Mitch Marner doesn't do that. And that will really kind of help balance out what that line can do, and I think it will add to their offense, even though Barbashev is like clearly the least important in terms of like skill on that line and in the top 6 kind of in general. But I do think that he is a necessary add for this team, and although I didn't like the addition when it happened, I think that he has grown into a player that fits with where he is in the Vegas lineup, and I think that does add value, more so than just who he is as an individual player. Riley Smith obviously, came back to Vegas after being bounced around a little bit in Pittsburgh and now in with the Rangers. And, he adds a huge piece of depth to this team, right? Like, he's able to, come in here to Vegas and be a very good, third line option for this team. And it's kind of crazy that he is on the third line and is as will be as helpful as he is what I'm trying to say, I guess. But Riley Smith is just a toned down version of what he was a couple years ago in Vegas. Obviously, he's getting older, but I think that the familiarity with how Vegas runs things will be good. He's going to be obviously a leader in the room because he's been around Vegas. He understands what this team wants. He's going to be somebody who can kind of help out some of those younger players as well, and the new players coming in general. He's been somebody who's left Vegas and then come back now, so he knows what the pastures look like outside of here, and I think that his take on it would be that they aren't very good, which is why he signed for the deal that he did in Vegas. So I really think that Riley Smith's value to the team, I think, comes more extrinsically. I think it's more what he can do for the team off the ice that makes him exceptionally valuable to this team as a leader, but his on ice numbers are still very good. So that's kind of when I talk about teams adding good locker room guys in quotes, that's great, but they still have to be on the ice. And Riley Smith is kind of the perfect example of somebody who can be a very good locker room guy, who was a leader on this team and will be again, but also somebody who can still produce on the ice. And I think that that's kind of the perfect example of what a quote unquote locker room guy should be on your team. I think it's a lot better than signing somebody who should be in the AHL and just forcing them to play up and basically like eating up a roster spot for that. But Riley Smith's kind of a perfect fit for that third line leadership role because he's still a very effective player despite not being as good as he was a couple years ago, but for the role that they'll be playing him in, it'll be fairly minimal in terms of responsibility, and he can still be a very effective spark plug player in the bottom six here for Vegas. I just want to touch on Brandon Saad because Brandon Saad is somebody they picked up on waivers from St. Louis. It seemed like he'd fallen out of favor with them. He's 32 years old, on a cheap contract. But Brandon Saad can still add, he's still a very good secondary offensive creator, right? This is somebody who can still put up a good amount of points. We saw that in his run in Vegas. He stepped into Vegas and was immediately an effective player. And we talked with this with Jack on the podcast, and just we discussed how it was just such a very good waiver claim, and it was kind of a surprising move that other teams hadn't jumped on it. And Brandon Saad obviously felt fairly comfortable there. He re-signed, and as an offensive kind of just pure offensive player, not being asked to do a whole lot, it really seems like it's very Jonathan Drouin to Colorado, right? Somebody who used to be a pretty big name, was heralded as a top six forward who was going to be very good and had a bunch of success early in his career, and then fell out of favor with the team that he was on at the time, and they got picked up to just kind of be an offensive guy, middle six forward, somebody who's not going to have a ton of pressure to perform, and is going to be when you look back at the season, you'd be like, wow, Brandon Saad had a really strong season when you look at his numbers, and it's like you're not really going to care about the defensive lapses and the issues that he had there. He's actually somebody that has, I'd say 2 years ago was a anomaly for his defensiveness, but he's still not a great defender regardless. But I do think that Brandon Saad could be somebody we look back at the end of the year and be like, wow, he had a very strong season. And it's going to be because he's going to be placed in roles against competition that is weaker than his skill set should probably allow, and he's somebody who's going to he's not going to get special teams opportunities, but 5-on-5 he could be a very effective player, and it's somebody that I think could really help the secondary scoring. When I talk about teams like the Oilers, for example, who lacked secondary scoring, guys like Brandon Saad are the perfect counter for that, and I think that he could be a very, very important player to what the bottom six looks like for the Vegas Golden Knights, because he's going to add that offensive juice that a lot of teams just don't have. We look at the blue line, and obviously, the loss of Alex Pietrangelo is the biggest thing that kind of stares at you here. But, Braden McNabb as a 3 is actually a a pretty solid option. He's a super effective defender. Zach Whitecloud as a 4 is fine. I think that there are definitely better options out there, and if this team is in on Rasmus Andersson, I think that's a better option. Jeremy Lauzon actually had a decent season last year for what he is, but like there's nothing super exciting there. But Shea Theodore and Noah Hannafin are still the two top guys on this team. Now I like Shea Theodore, but I think that the decline of Shea Theodore has begun. He's not the super underrated top tier defender that he was a couple of years ago. And Noah Hannafin is still obviously like a very effective player as well. But I think that the Vegas's strength comes from just the sheer amount of talent that's in the top 4, rather than having a number 1 guy. And I think that's why their overall ranking wasn't as high as some people might think it should be. Maybe people think it's too high. But that's kind of why. It's just like, this team is lacking that true like elite number 1 defender, but the depth on the team is still very good, right? Like Braden McNabb on a lot of teams we've talked about as a first paired guy. Noah Hannafin is the number 1 on a lot of teams, and Shea Theodore is the number 1 on a lot of teams as well. So the top 4 in that sense still has a ton of talent in it. And let's begin with Shea Theodore, because Shea Theodore, like I said, like especially offensively, like his numbers just have kind of dwindled in what they were, and I think that his stock overall has kind of fallen out of favor. But like when you talk about Shea Theodore, right, like his biggest strength as a player was his ability in the transition game, right? His rush offense transition game, and he is still one of the best defensemen in the NHL at that, right? Like his ability to retrieve pucks and exit the zone might be better than any other defender in the NHL. Or very few exceptions of players ahead of him. His zone entries are some of the best in the NHL. His zone entry defense is some of the best in the NHL, right? Like his play, Shea Theodore might be the best like blue line to blue line defender in the NHL. Just in terms of his ability to transition into the offensive zone, his ability to transition out of his zone, and the ability to deny entry into his own zone. Those 3 areas, like I don't know if there's a better defender in those 3 areas in the NHL outside of Shea Theodore, right? Maybe there's 1 or 2. I'd really have to dive into that. But in terms of like his overall numbers last year, I think that he might be number 1 in that area, and I'd be pretty confident in saying that. And that's where his value is going to come from, right? Now, he's not going to do a ton in terms of like his own offensive production. He doesn't take a lot of shots. He doesn't generate, a ton of primary, high danger chances, especially for a number 1 defenseman, right? And in general, he does. Obviously, he's above average, but nothing there. His passing isn't fantastic, right? There's a lot of deficiencies in his passing games in the offensive zone, but blue line to blue line, he adds a enormous amount of value to this team, and based on the talent they have offensively, they don't really need him to be a play driving, defender. They need him to be somebody who can get out of the defensive zone and get the puck into the offensive zone. And I really think that, especially with Mitch Marner and what Mitch Marner's skill set is, him and Shea Theodore should have very good chemistry. They should bounce off each other perfectly, and that's really where the value in what Shea Theodore is going to come from, is in his ability just to get the puck up to the players who are going to make goals happen. And in that sense, like, he is the perfect number 1 guy for this team. And yes, there is some deficiencies in his game. I acknowledge that, but for what he does well, he does it extremely well, and he does it in a way that's going to benefit what Vegas is trying to do. And that's where the value comes from with me for Shea Theodore. Even though like his overall value, like as a, if you're ranking defenseman, has dropped a little bit in the last, year or 2. Noah Hannafin's kind of in the same boat. He's somebody that was, Noah Hannafin's kind of fun because like he's somebody that I didn't love, for a bit. And then, he has his breakout kind of in Calgary where he looks really, really good. And now he's in Vegas, and he looks like a top level defenseman, and he's getting paid like, he's not really getting paid like it though, right? Like $7.4 million for 7 years as a 28-year-old defenseman isn't like an albatross deal, right? Like it's a lot better in value than what the Ivan Provorov deal looks like for a much better defender, so a much better defenseman. So like, the context of that, it actually looks like a pretty solid deal for a top pair defenseman, and his play driving is also really good. Very, very good, passer, good setup guy, but this is more of your, shooting offensive defenseman compared to what, Shea Theodore is. I think Shea Theodore's offense comes from a lot more, like, a lot more of a nuanced spot than Noah Hannafin's does.
And it's something that people are going to miss if they don't actually like dissect the game properly. Like a lot of people are going to look at Noah Hannafin as the clear number one defenseman on Vegas because his point totals are going to be better. His, in zone offense is going to be more prevalent. But I do think that, the value that Shea Theodore adds, as I just talked about, makes him, a more valuable player. But that's, besides the point. Noah Hannafin does offense in a different way than Shea Theodore is. He brings value offensively in a much different way. And that's why they complement each other really well, right? Whether or not they're playing together is irrelevant. But just in terms of what this blue line is, right? They offer different things. And I think that is it's something that doesn't get talked about enough when you're building a defense, right? Because you can have, offensive defenseman, defensive defenseman, right? And these buzzwords get thrown around a lot, but it's how that offense is created and how they bring value. And Hannafin and Shea Theodore do it in such different ways that, like, yes, they're both quote unquote offensive defensemen, but they do it in a way that it brings different skills to the team, and that is where the value comes from, right? So that's something that I think gets lost a lot when people talk about, offensive defensemen. You have too many offensive defensemen. It's like, well, they do different things, and that's where the value comes from. So I really like Noah Hannafin. I think that he's really good. He's somebody that might have an outside shot at Team Canada. I don't know. But he's a very strong overall player, and I think that he'll be a very good fit also for what Vegas is trying to do this year. Brayden McNabb is he's the defensive rock on the blue line, and that's going to be more so now that Pietrangelo's gone. He's somebody that has really solid penalty kill numbers. His offense is fine, but defensively is where he really shines. And for a team that did a pretty good job, denying, expected goal chances last year and goals as well, Brayden McNabb is going to have to take a step up from that. Right now, he is 34 going on 35, so that's a big ask for a guy like this, but he's somebody that's used to it, right? He played first line in terms of time on ice last year, and I really think that he is older, right? Like, it is a concern that he is 35 years old. It's the same argument that I made with Mattias Ekholm in Edmonton. The difference is Brayden McNabb is the third option here, and Ekholm isn't. But besides the point, I'll be fair. The age thing is a concern for Brayden McNabb, right? And the wheels could fall off Brayden McNabb at any moment. And if they do, then Vegas is going to have a massive issue in terms of defensive defensemen on this team, in terms of people who can stop chances against. But until that happens, Brayden McNabb is still a highly, highly effective defender, and that's going to be extremely valuable to a team that, yes, has some pretty good defensive forwards, but the blue line does kind of lack that defensive ability, and I think losing Pietrangelo is going to hurt them the most in that category. And he's going to be maybe the most important defenseman on this blue line because of that. Because you know what you're going to get with Hannafin and Theodore. You know what you're going to get for the most part with Whitecloud. You kind of know what you're going to get with Lizotte and the rest of the group that they decide to put out there. But Brayden McNabb is the guy who's going to have to kind of hold the defensive structure of this blue line together. At least for now, right? Like, obviously Vegas is Vegas. They could go get, I don't know, Cale Makar could be a Vegas Golden Knight by the end of the year, and all this kind of gets thrown out the window. But in terms of what he is going to bring to this team that's so different than anybody else is that defensive presence, and it's something that this team desperately needs because their blue line's kind of lacking it. Finally, I have Zach Whitecloud, who does have a bit of that defensive presence to him, but his competition level's just been so low throughout his career that he's somebody that I'm intrigued to watch, right? Like, Zach Whitecloud is probably the most intriguing player on this blue line, maybe on the team, honestly, because he's 27. He's just, he's 27 at the moment. $2.8 million for the next 3 seasons. It's a very good contract. But his competition level has been so low that it's hard for me to believe in his defensive numbers, right? Because it's just, he hasn't played against anybody. It's like, yeah, he's playing good defense against, third and fourth liners. Like, that's great. But now, especially with Pietrangelo out, Zach Whitecloud is the guy who is going to be asked to step up into the top 4. And if he can do it at an effective level and be another, defensive player for this team, then Vegas is going to have a very strong top 4. Because Whitecloud doesn't need to be super offensive. He just needs to be able to bring that defensive presence against higher competition, right? And if you can pair, off Theodore and Hannafin and with, McNabb and Whitecloud and believe that the offense that the prior two are going to generate and the defense that, the latter two are going to commit is going to be enough to carry the top 4. And then your third pair just can kind of be guys who just, if you put out there, the wheels just don't fall off. And I do think that'd be good enough with this offensive core to be a extremely dangerous team in the NHL. Like, I do believe that. It's just a matter of, can Brayden McNabb keep it together, and can Zach Whitecloud take that next step? And if those two things happen, then this blue line's going to look pretty good. And finally, we talk about the goalies here, and Adin Hill obviously is still a strong goalie. I think that his value is overstated because he went on the cup run, right, and people love to hang their hats on Stanley Cups, and that's fair. But it's been a couple years. He hasn't looked great. Akira Schmid isn't any world-beating goaltender either. This is an area where I think that an upgrade could be used and could be necessary potentially, maybe just as getting a better, a more secure backup than Akira Schmid. And I want to. It's hard to talk about speculation, and I'm not going to talk about speculation at this point because certain players have not yet been signed by the Vegas Golden Knights. So it's hard for me. I'm not going to analyze the team in that sense because it hasn't happened yet. In saying that, this seems like a team who could have and should have put a claim in for Connor Ingram. And that would have been a better option for their backup goaltender than other players that they have yet to sign. They haven't signed anybody yet, so we don't know. If things do come to pass, I'll probably make a video on it, analyzing, my thoughts on it. But as of this moment, this is the tandem that Vegas is rocking with right now, and it's good, but it's not great. But I do think that it's good enough with the rest of the team to, make them, pretty strong contenders. Adin Hill's numbers are solid, right? Like he's been a solid goaltender. But I don't know how much I trust him, right? Like his consistency level in the regular season has been very good. He doesn't do great with high danger chances, and I think that's kind of where a lot of the issues come in because like his expected goals numbers don't look great because the high danger chances aren't very good, so his goals above expected gets tanked because of that. It's the whole thing on how the stats are calculated. I do think that Adin Hill is good enough to be a starting goalie on a Stanley Cup team because he's done it before with the same team, but he doesn't like blow me away, right? Like it's very much if you swapped out Adin Hill and Stuart Skinner for the last 4 years of their careers, Adin Hill would be the player getting run out of town in Edmonton, and Stuart Skinner would be heralded as the guy that's good enough to win a Stanley Cup and is the backup goalie for Team Canada. Like, I fully believe that. I think that they're very similar in terms of their overall values for their teams. The only difference is that Vegas is a much better built team, and Adin Hill is a Stanley Cup. Like, that's basically what it is here. You can go check out my Oilers video for my thoughts on Stuart Skinner because I don't think he's the problem, but that's a whole other thing. Overall, I think Adin Hill's good enough. I don't think he's going to steal series and games for you the way that the top goalies in the league will. Vegas doesn't really need that. Their team's good enough. Adin Hill's good enough. Finally, the special teams. The power play is going to be very good, right? Like the power play is going to be good. I don't think I need to talk about why adding Mitch Marner to an already potent power play is going to make it better. The penalty kill is the area of potential concern here. Riley Smith getting brought in does help that out. Mitch Marner is a decent penalty killer. He's able to run the power kill with him and Jack Eichel potentially and generate some offense that way. Adin Hill is a decent penalty kill goaltender. It's an area that I think they could have addressed. I think that somebody like a Joel Armia for the bottom six could have been a good fit in. You could have replaced Alexander Holtz with him. I think Holtz's surplus value just isn't kind of worth it at this point. That might have been my one thing that they do in the offseason that was different. But overall, it's a solid unit, and the power play is definitely going to carry the overall value of the special teams unit. So there you go. That is my deep dive on the Vegas Golden Knights. Let me know what you think of Vegas down below. We have 2 teams left. I'm sure you can figure out which 2 teams they are. But thank you so much for watching. And if you've liked this series and this video, leave a like. Make sure you subscribe for the last 2 episodes, and so you don't miss any other content that I'll be putting out throughout the regular season. So thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.